Good evening. It's 1:30. We'll start the meeting. Welcome everybody. As you're aware, we'll be webcast tonight, and if you've got your phones on, please switch them on silent. We are not expecting a fire or a fire alarm, so if they go off, it'll be the real thing. We go out the front and into the park to assemble. Okay. Right. Item 1, absence for apologies or substitutions. Have we any? No. Item 2, declaration of interest.
I'm a HCC councillor as well, so some of the aspects I will be discussing are Hampshire related too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Urgent items. Have we any? I'll keep looking you up. See, I told you I should have been sitting here. Minutes of the last meeting. Councillor Waldridge.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that there's one bit, page 6, that I don't think was accurate. Basically, I asked at that meeting whether the difference in the list between the over 55s and those requiring extra care, and I asked for a written answer as to what the difference is in the waiting list, and I haven't got that yet. And the way it's phrased in the minute is that it's not phrased that I asked a question, which I did ask. So I'd like that rectified if that's possible, because I'm still waiting for that answer.
Can we look at that and see if we can sort that out?
Because I pretty much think that the waiting list for over 55s is very little, but the waiting list for extra care is much, much higher, and I haven't had an answer on that. But it was all put together in one figure, so I asked for clarification of the different lists, and it hasn't arrived. So. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, again on page 6, it says it was clarified that a newsletter of available housing was produced for those without access to the internet. However, applications were made online. Definitely remember the bit about the newsletter, but I don't remember it being mentioned at the time that applications for the houses were to be made online. I don't know, that's probably just a small point, but I did try to check it on the YouTube video, but I couldn't find it. It to me misnamed.
Yeah, we'll pick that up and feed that back. Yeah. Councillor Robert Trade. Oh, you again.
Okay, we'll debate that one. Good evening, councillors. I think according to the start of my report, I think we have Councillor Wooldridge. His name features prominently at the top of the report for this one. I'm not a great one for reading through the reports because I'm sure you've got it in front of you and you've read it through already. But I would like to start with the 4 specific requests that were made to address this thing, which was the impact of the reduced number of cuts on the reputation with visitors and residents. Does it offer value for money, particularly whether the changes are impacting on the nettles and the brambles, issues of accessibility within various parts of the borough, and arrangements with the borough and the county were the 4 specific areas. So I'll do a little bit of a preamble. I'll address those 4 specific areas, and then I'll take any questions that we have specific concerns, if that's okay with you, Chair. Okay. So the basic situation is that we, as an authority, undertake grass cutting and a large degree of grounds maintenance on behalf of HCC. That particularly affects areas along the highway areas, and that really, like all of our work, falls into 2 separate chunks. So we have the winter maintenance period, which is where we are starting now. And we then have the summer grass cutting period. And I raised that at the start here because I think there's some lack of clarity in the original questions about how what we were looking to get some answers on. So we cut not all, but a large amount of Hampshire County Council's verges. They also use other subcontractors and their own members of staff as well to tackle that. And in the summer months, obviously, we also cut our own land, and we also cut some grass for some of the housing associations as well. So it's quite a mixture. Now, there are a number of specifications in there. So HCC require that we cut the grass 4 times a year for their land, unless it's high-speed roads where it is 6 times a year. Traditionally, we have cut the grass up to 11 or even 12 times a year. And obviously last year we took the decision to reduce that down to 8 cuts a year. And this year was the first year that went through. And I know that the reason that we've got this is because Scrutiny were interested to see whether that had a significantly adverse impact. Also, as we know, we had a number of complaints this year from a wide number of areas, and I'll come on to those as we come through. So we actually managed to cut 7 times this year. But I think the issues that we have largely go back to the winter maintenance period for the end of 2020, start of 2021. And obviously you will be still probably fresh in your memories. We had a little something called COVID that really did impact both on our ability to deploy staff, insofar as that it became harder for us to put several staff into a vehicle and move them around the district. And also we had a number of staff that either had COVID, were unavailable because of COVID, because they were shielding. And as a result of that, I think it would be fair to say that the winter maintenance period wasn't as short as we'd like it to be. Unfortunately, that then runs into the summer grass cutting period. And again, we started that period rather much on the back foot. And if you scroll down on your sheets to the nice big graph that we've got there, I'm trying to think what page we're on. Page 4 there. You can see a graph that shows you the seasonal grass growing period for the last 3 years. I appreciate that it's not a very easy graph to navigate your way around, probably particularly in black and white. But basically, if you look at the line that shoots up in May, that goes from very low to very high, and peaks there in June, right under where it says seasonal grass growth data, under the word data, that peak was this year. What you can see there is that we had an exceptionally high period of grass growth in that time. And unfortunately, that was the area that caused us the greatest difficulty, in that it occurred very early in the season, and we had a very, very high level of grass growth that would have been challenging under any normal circumstances, let alone ones where we were pushed for staffing at the time, and a little bit late because we were embedded with the winter maintenance period. This peak was one that occurred across the country. It wasn't just Basingstoke and Deane, and anecdotal evidence from maintenance and operations teams across the country was that they were all struggling with the same thing that we were struggling with, which was rapidly growing grass and a difficulty in getting that first cut done. And I think it was the first cut of the season that was the real problem for us, because the grass grew so thickly and quickly. The net result of that means it becomes much harder to cut and much slower. So what we ended up doing is, at the time when we were desperately wanting to have a quick cut across the entire patch, we ended up having an exceptionally slow one. So whereas we would normally take perhaps 2 or 3 weeks to cut all the grass across the borough, it took us best part of a month. So that slowed us down in getting to areas, and meant that when we did get to areas, the grass was a lot higher and harder to cut than it might have been. And because it's a lot longer, it's a lot tougher, and that also has an impact on the cutting experience for the residents, because all our machines are a self-mulching machine, so we don't pick the grass up, we cut it. All the machines are designed to break it up into as smaller pieces as possible. It then sits on the surface and it rots down and it feeds the grass for the following period, which saves lots of taking grass to be composted and all those sorts of things. However, the difficulty with such long grass is that, again, even if you're cutting it up as part of the process, you've physically got bigger chunks. So it doesn't look as tidy, it doesn't look as good. So there are a number of aesthetic challenges to us that we faced by this. 1, the longer grass. 2, the time it took to cut us. 3, the appearance post that first cut. And it would be very fair to say that if you look at the complaints that came in, those complaints are very, very focused in that early part of the season, when the grass was aesthetically longer. Of course, if you're going to have a perfect storm, have a really perfect storm. That was also at the time when most people were not being allowed out. Everybody was at home, lots of people were on furlough, and what were they doing to fill their days? They were going out walking and wanting to take the kids to play on the grass and do all those recreational types of things. And what were they finding? Long grass. And it is hardly surprising that from a public perception point of view at that point in time, it wasn't looking very good, I think. So that's where we were at with that. There's no point in avoiding the difficulty. That's where we got to. Once we got through that first cut, for the rest of the season, if you look at the complaint charts, then trying to think which are on page, let's go down, page 7. First one there, it says grass issue. You can see very clearly there that there is a substantial spike in June, which coincides exactly with that period of excessive grass growth. And then we have a very rapid decline back down in July. And if you look at the previous 2 years there, you can see that whilst there's always a consistent complaint level, we're never going to be everywhere at the right time and keeping everybody happy. The complaint level past July wasn't actually much different to how it was in what we might deem to be a normal year, for the want of a better expression. So yes, we had a very concentrated and difficult period. Now, throughout that period, we weren't sat there idle, contrary to what some people may have thought, and we took some steps that will serve us in better stead for next year coming forward, which is that we have now embarked upon some additional training for some of our litter picking staff, street cleaning staff, so that they are now trained up to drive the mowers as well. So effectively, we don't have particularly more staff in that respect. We'll come on to staffing numbers in a minute, but what we do have is we have a number of cross-trained staff who we can now deploy more flexibly and as required in future years, and that's certainly been one of the positives that have come out of this. We've also invested a substantial sum, I think it's £300,000 in new mowers, which are more flexible in their use to allow us to mow in different areas. They're slightly quicker than the old ones. They work in a slightly different way, but again, that don't perceive that as a risk of poorer quality, which I think was where we had at the start of the year. That wasn't the mowers' fault. The mowers deliver a good quality cut and they work well. The difficulty they were having was that it was just long grass and it was tough grass. Whatever equipment we were using at that time, we would have still had issues with it. And again, those were issues that were reported from authorities across the country who were having the same experience that we had. I'll leave it there and take some questions.
We have one visiting councillor, Councillor McCormack, so I don't know whether... Sorry, you'll have to speak up then. No, I do realise I'll have a go at you later after the meeting, but I'll be nice tonight. But it's good to see people actually coming to the meetings and raising issues. The only point I want to make out, and I don't think it's going to be raised its head tonight, but we're not here to knock the staff, and I don't believe we will be. This is about the works programme and everything else. So we're not, you know, I don't want people to start saying, well, so-and-so didn't do this, so it's trying to get things resolved. If that makes sense, it's not about getting, it's not directed at you, and it's directed at all the committee. Because I've got a lot of faith in our workforce. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'll ask some difficult questions then. I'll keep it brief and factual. When were we supposed to start the summer programme, and when did we actually start the summer programme, and how long did it take to do the summer programme, and which areas were done in which order? I'm thinking especially about Winklebury, which I think was one of the last ones to be done, and it took 2 or 3 weeks to do. And what lessons can we learn from that? It could be that we've got a budget process coming up, and we are almost certainly going to have more grounds maintenance staff as part of that. And also, is there any indication that there might be some kind of climate change aspect to this? As things get warmer and wetter, will we have more growth of plants? And my final question is regarding the bush and hedge trimming, because we have had quite a few examples across Basingstoke. We've got bushes and hedges clogging paths. They are being addressed. There is a big backlog. Is that likely to be given increased resourcing for this year's winter programme? So that's all my questions. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't a long list, Councillor. Right, okay, let's let's try and start at the beginning of that one. So when would we normally start? How long's a piece of string? So effectively, grass growing is seasonally determined by the temperature and the duration of the days. So we would normally expect grass cutting to commence around about sort of, well, March, April time at its earliest. Late would be May. So we will run the winter programme for as long as we have staffing available for that. So the issue we had this year was that we were running, because we were short staffed because of the COVID and the difficulty of deploying those staff that we had. That meant that the work that we were looking to do was taking longer over the winter period. So we were not actually commencing the start of the grass cutting until April time this year. What then happened, obviously, was we then had this particular growth spurt, as I say, at the perfect time for us, if you like. So that was the one that we started grass cutting, and what we very quickly found, like everybody else did, was that it was growing faster than we could cut it, quite frankly. And what then happens, as I said, is you then get into the fact that you are then delayed. So a cut that may have taken you, say, 3 hours in a particular area suddenly takes you 4 hours in that area, which then delays what you've cut into the following day, and you start getting behind yourself. With regards to which areas were cut in which sequence, that is a matter for the operations team. There's no preference or anything else to any given area. We do it on a sort of on a ride and cut basis, so we tend to sort of work out. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't load the vehicles on the mowers onto the trucks and take them out to the outlying areas. But ultimately, by definition, you've got a fixed resource. Somebody's going to be further down that line than anywhere else. If that was Winklebury this year, then so be it. As I say, the problem we had was that the whole time period became extended. So as I say, normally we would, the first cut is always the difficult one, but that one just kept going for almost double the length of time that we would expected it to have done. With regards to your queries about the winter maintenance, we have commenced our winter maintenance period now. That's already started. The grass has stopped growing. So we are now out there doing the hedge trimming and the tidying of the beds and all those sorts of things. With regards to additional staffing resource, that's not in place yet for us, but we're not anticipating that causing us a problem at this point in the year, at this point in time. We're in the process of recruiting staff, though these days we're constantly recruiting staff because of the joys of staff recruitment that everybody else has, quite frankly. And also the same issues apply to where we are struggling to get in agency or temporary staff as well. And whilst we don't rely on those, they are often there to show some when we need a bit of flexibility, or if we have a couple of members of staff who go off sick or something like that, then normally we would dip into that as a more flexible resource. But that is increasingly difficult, as it is for everybody else in the country as well. I don't think we're experiencing anything that isn't common, and the knock-on impacts, I'm afraid to say, are pick your metropolitan borough and speak to your operations team. We certainly have, and they're all pretty much saying the same issues, because as you say, it's very weather dependent. Is there a climate change issue to this? I think that's very hard to say. We know that the weather patterns have shifted, and that winters are becoming milder, and on the whole slightly wetter, and obviously that promotes grass growth in the ways that we perhaps haven't seen before. And whereas I said before, we've got a very clear winter period and summer period and grass cutting period, that area is becoming more blurred. But this was an exceptional year. Now, who's to say whether next year will be an exceptional year? I can't tell you. I'm not so hoping we will be in a better position there, because we don't have the COVID pandemic at the moment in the same way we have had. So our staffing levels are higher, and we will be in a better position to proceed and put more staffing on the ground.
Did you want to come back on anything?
It was just on the issue of hedge cutting. So I was told that a contract had been drawn up for one cut a year, and I just wanted to check that that was correct, and if that was going to be subject to a review for hedges, mainly because we did have some exceptional problems this year, and not being an expert gardener, but having hedges in my garden, I know from my own experience that normally things grow really quickly in May, and then tend to have a late spurt in the autumn before the leaves start falling off trees and things.
So our contract with Hampshire is for one cut a year, and that is in the winter period. We would certainly never cut in May, because that's the bird nesting season. We would our normal routine will be to cut once in the winter. We do come back in other areas where there are we do have other supplemental growth, and if we get problems reported, but the primary cut will be in the winter period. And we'll certainly come back if there are other issues, but cutting in May is, we we would really avoid that unless it was a particular issue. I mean, obviously, if the issue is brambles across a footpath or something like that, where there's no risk to wildlife and it's clearly a health and safety issue, then that's not a concern. We could do that straight away. But we certainly wouldn't be looking to do any generic hedge cutting in that description that late in the year.
Councillor Mullally.
Thank you, Chairman. So, first of all, let me start with a lot of thanks to the ground maintenance staff, which have been working quite hard. With due respect to these ones, these questions are mulling me around. Your statement on 216 in the report says that over the past 30 years, this growing season has increased over 24 days. And what is the rationale behind cutting down that 11 to the 8? That's my first question. And the second question is, so according to the 2.1.4, it says that, 2.1.5, it says that we are cutting around 6 million square feet of meter square of grass. That means in 2020, we cut around 66 million meters squared. And in 2021, we managed to do it only 42 million meters square of grass. That is effectively 36% less. And that 36% is completely due to staff problems or COVID, or anything to attribute it to less number of staff or recruitment freeze or drafting the staff to the other departments.
So if we go back, so the decision to reduce the number of grass cuts was part of the previous budget, one of the budget decisions to reduce that from 11 to 8. In terms of the position, obviously Hampshire County Council, as we've talked about, we're cutting an awful lot of grass on behalf of Hampshire County Council. And part of that contract specifically says certain areas should be cut 4 times, certain areas should be cut 6 times. So we're already above, way beyond what we're required to do as a minimum by Hampshire County Council. And in sort of consistent level across other districts, certainly what we found when we benchmarked what we were doing, is that most other areas are already cutting to an 8-cut regime elsewhere. So there was a strong logic to say, that's seen as a reasonably good standard to achieve. And obviously one of the benefits it also produces is a reduction of carbon. We're talking about 2 or 3 less cycles around the borough with all those grass cutting machines. Effectively, that's a reduction in our carbon emissions associated with this activity. So on the one hand, we're going over and above what we're required to do from Hampshire County Council to meet the requirements of their specification and the contract that we have. It is a very consistent service against other local authority areas. And as I say, there is actually a climate change benefit in terms of reducing that level down to a minute. It's at the 8 cuts a year, which was part of the budget process last year. So those were the rationales. It wasn't, and that's what we're striving to achieve. This year we were slightly delayed, obviously, and that caused the issues. We weren't able to get 8 cuts in total this year. We're in a far better place, as Rob's described, because we have staff that are trained up from our street cleansing team to support if that's required next year. Touch wood, it won't be. So we've got more resilience built into our service as well.
Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to say a big thank you for the report. I find it a very honest and refreshing report. You've basically addressed all the issues in a very thorough way and an honest way as well. You're not sort of hiding behind anything. So thank you very much for that. I do appreciate that. It's nice to see a report written like that as well. So thank you. I have got some questions though. A few of them, if that's all right, about 3. Is that all right to list them all? So the first one, basically, given, I suppose it's talking about the grass cutting and the grounds maintenance across the whole, as a whole, really. And I know this has been addressed as part of the forthcoming budget, because I've sort of seen the papers for that. And that you are looking at sort of recruiting more staff going forward, at least to try and deal with some of these ongoing, long-standing issues. But I suppose my question is, the brambles and the nettles that have really sort of taken hold on the estates, and so you see them sort of in the planted areas where they've you know, that you see saplings, you see nettles, you see brambles and weeds, and they've sort of in the planted area, they've gone onto the grass, and they've really sort of taken hold, and you can't get rid of them by a simple sort of grass cut. I'm sort of saying, I suppose my question is it been a sort of, and I'm going to ask it in conjunction to staffing over the last sort of maybe 5-year period, and one thing that is missing from the report for me is a comparison between how staffing has been cut over a maybe 3-4 year period, because it'd be interesting to see how it has been cut, given the fact that the staff are now having to cover so much more land, as you've alluded to in the report. So I'd like your opinion, your honest opinion, and I do you give honest opinions, on do you think you have got now enough staffing to cover the area, bearing in mind it's a bigger area, and bearing in mind, as is alluded to in the report and in the budget papers, that there are these problem areas, these plants that have weeds that have taken hold of and now need to be addressed. So I'd like your view on that, your honest view, if you could give me that. I suppose my other question is, do we need to renegotiate our agreement with Hampshire? The fact that they're only sort of paying, I presume, for one cut a year, and we're subsidising all that. Is there somebody we can go back to in Hampshire and say, well, this is taking the piss, really, and we need to do something about it? So that would be another question, and why aren't we doing that? We ought to be fined for that. And then my third question is about, I like the fact that you've got flexibility in going to the street cleansing staff, and being able to use them in terms of crisis for grass cutting. But is that a good use of their staff? That those staff know their rounds, they know what bits of streets they need to do and what they don't need to do. So is it really a good thing that we're taking, or we should even be thinking of having to take those staff and use them for grass cutting? Shouldn't we be having enough grass cutting staff to deal with potential emergencies? And we shouldn't be shafting in staff from other areas. I wouldn't have thought it would be a sensible way of organising something, but I'd like your thoughts on that. But I do think it's good you've got that flexibility, and finally, I think you've really, you're saying you've really learned from this, and it's good to see that you're prepared to say these are the things that we've learned from this exercise. So I hope it's been a worthwhile exercise scrutinising this and dealing with it. And as I say, it's welcome to see the extra resources and staffing in the proposed budget as well. So they're my questions. They're a bit rambling, I'm afraid, but I've got some questions out of that.
I'll just say that it's not, we've got to take this serious. When we talk about Hampshire, we're an agent of them, and it's a feasible question to ask whether we can negotiate a better deal. It's not, people out there are watching us. It's not funny. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, right. Let's start at the beginning. It's a very good place to start. So, with regards to the condition of some of the beds, I think it would be fair to say that across the borough, and certainly around a lot of the estates, a lot of the planting is quite old now, and some of the original planting has failed, and nature has a way of filling that little space for us, whether we want it to or not. And that's certainly an issue that Gordon Wade from our grounds maintenance team is very actively pursuing at the moment, and looking at some of the replanting of some of those areas. And you're right, those are pernicious weeds that will take some digging out in some of those areas. But that work will be undertaken as we do some of the bed replanting. We can control it with regular and routine cutting. It's not ideal, but we can control it, and that's where we've been. I think some of the cutting this year, as we know, was not undertaken as quickly as possible, or perhaps as frequently as possible during the winter period. And that certainly stored us up some of the problems, if you like, that we experienced over the summer months, because they weren't knocked back as far as perhaps they would otherwise have been. But I am confident that we have enough staff over the winter maintenance period to go out and tackle those areas. And again, we cover a huge area. Whilst we will endeavour to go around and cut everything and trim everything that we can do, we still very much welcome reports from members of the public. So if there are particular issues that we can respond to, we will do so. And as I say, we are out there actively looking at those areas where, let's say, the bedding has, the planting it needs updating and replacing. Also, a lot of the planting that's out there, perhaps in the 21st century, we wouldn't necessarily choose to plant some of the plants that were planted in the 1960s, he said delicately, because some of those have proven to be quite vigorous. And likewise, we'd probably like to lose a few of those as well. So yeah, there is a scope for change there. With regard to staffing, the staffing increases that have been identified in the budget cover a number of different areas. They're not necessarily in the grounds maintenance area for us. So I don't think there is an issue, particularly with about the amount of staff that we have. I think we have enough staff there. There will always be some sort of staff sickness and staff turnover, and that sort of flexibility of being able to use the street cleansing staff, even if it's just for a day or two, to keep on top of the grass, if you like, is very much a feature of where we're going. You're absolutely right. They're needed to keep the streets clean and to pick up the litter. But certainly during COVID, when we had a lot less people out and about, strangely enough, we had a lot less litter. So that was a rather welcome side effect for us as an operations team. But the grass, unfortunately, didn't quite get that memo. That's why we used it particularly this year. How much we'll have to use it in future years, I genuinely don't know. Hopefully, not much. But it's there, and it's something we did. We learned from the experience. We've cross-skilled the staff, which actually they quite enjoyed. I think it was a bit of a change for them. And also from a staff development point of view, we may well have staff who want to transition from our street cleaning team up to our grounds maintenance team. So it's a win-win all round for that. Sorry, I've lost track of the third point now. Oh, Hampshire is the delights of Hampshire. From the issue of do we cut the grass too often, and should we renegotiate the contract, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because that we as a borough have set a very high standard over the last few years. The expectation of our residents is high, that the grass is cut, and we know this year when we didn't meet that expectation, we had complaints. So if we were to reduce the frequency of cut down to Hampshire's minimum, I think a lot of people would find that minimum probably unacceptable, and we would have a lot of complaints. The other issue is that the grass that we cut is a mosaic of different owners. Some of it's owned by us, some of it's owned by the Housing Association, some of it's Hampshire, and we would be, I think, probably rightly criticised if we cut the grass on that side of the room because it was Hampshire's and left the grass on this side of the room because it belonged to or vice versa. So there is an efficiency of going out there and just cutting it all while you're there, because the logistics of going, no, Fred, you've got to cut that this week, but don't cut it next week, don't really work. It's just too confusing for the staff. We already have enough issues with the biodiversity zones, where we are deliberately allowing some of the grass to grow longer and cutting it less frequently. That's already a bit of an issue for local residents, some of who understand that's part of our biodiversity work within, and very successful work as well within the borough, with some superb results on biodiversity increases. We have unfortunately had a couple of moments where our grass cutters have been a little enthusiastic and cut down bits that perhaps shouldn't have been cut down. That's an issue, and we rely very much on these guys to go out and remember what they're cutting, because we can't oversee them for 8 hours a day, and they've got a lot of grass to cut. But Do we have enough of them? Yes. Do we have the right kit now? Yes. You know, it's been a bit of a you know, we've moved with the times. As I say, we've got faster, quicker, more manoeuvrable equipment now than we've ever had. This year just wasn't our year, but it wasn't just our year. If you went to Wakefield, they weren't having a good year either. You know. So, okay, does that answer your questions, Councillor?
Just a clarification point, and then. Thank you, Chair. It was just to add to what Rob has said, because obviously everything he said is right and it makes sense, but it's just getting that point about the extra budget for next year and the staffing issues. The point is that the posts that the operations team have, they are enough. So it's not the fact that posts have been cut and we don't have enough staff. The fact is the posts are there, it's trying to fill them. And what we have found, and I've, you know, constantly discussing this with officers, and over the pandemic, you know, we need drivers, and people have left to go and retrain as HGV drivers and go and drive for delivery vans and get paid more money because supermarkets are paying silly amounts of money. So we've got the posts, that's not the point. We can pump all the money in and give all the posts we want, but we still only have X number of mowers for bums on seats. And, you know, so it's not the staff in numbers, as in the posts that we're offering and the money we want to pay, it's getting the staff on those lawnmowers and being able to get them out there. And as Rob alluded to earlier, we have in the past been able to, if there's sickness or issues, been able to rely on agencies, and that's given us some form of flexibility. But even agencies, I think when you've approached them this summer, it was just impossible to get, and that was an issue up and down the country because there were just not people available. So the posts we have are fine, it's just trying to get the people into those posts. And this, I know the team are constantly interviewing and trying to recruit, but it's getting the right people, you know, because it's not easy. Like Rob said, they do have to remember what they're cutting, if they're biodiversity areas, all of that. So the posts are there, it's just finding the staff, which we're trying to do. And then the additional budget, which is obviously welcomed, the whole point of that is to make a difference to the areas that have, over the years, because of the planting that happened donkeys years ago, has fallen a bit into rack and ruin, and we haven't had the additional posts to do that because they've been concentrating on the other day-to-day work. So, you know, there'll be lots of other areas, but just to name a few, so places like Borden, Brighton Hill, Buckskin, those areas where some places aren't great, the purpose of those additional posts are to deal with that. So it's not the grass cutting, but what it will do, if it's next year we find that people are off sick, or there's another, hopefully there's not, but another pandemic or something that is unforeseen, we've got that flexibility to say, okay, it's not great, you're meant to be in Brighton Hill doing this, but actually the grass cutting is really urgent. We've got those people to pull off of that area of work to then put into the new one. So it's just getting those different areas right and not mixing it all up and thinking that we've slashed loads of posts. We haven't. It's just trying to fill those posts. And you know, the budget will be great because it will give the team more resilience if it comes to it. But hopefully the winter programme won't overrun this year, but none of us know. I mean, but that was the biggest issue this year, and that's why looking at the 8 cuts, we can't say, well, is 8 cuts enough? Because we can't really compare it to this year because we were already in trouble with the winter maintenance programme running over, and that was a knock-on effect of COVID. But hopefully that won't happen this year. And, you know, with the Hampshire thing, I've been doing this job long enough to know that we have subsidised Hampshire for grass cutting for years, and it's always been an issue in the budget, and we do try, but we get nowhere. So it is better for us and our residents that we don't have that mosaic approach, and we do go out, but we do have double-hatted councillors in the room. So, you know, the point you make is a valid one. If they want to take that back to Hampshire, they can and should. And obviously we as a team will continue to consider that, and I talk to, you know, portfolio holders on the other side there, so we'll bring it up as well. Right, thank you for that. I suppose my clarification point is, I think it was implied earlier that I was suggesting that we were doing too many cuts for Hampshire. That was not what I was implying at all. I was suggesting that we should be going up there and negotiating that they give us more money for the cuts we're doing. I just want to make that 100% clear. So that's the clarification point. In terms of supplementary questions arising from what you just said, actually, is if we've got all these vacant posts which aren't being filled, are we offering people enough money? They seem to me to be quite highly skilled jobs if you're relying sort of people to be able to drive, remember all this different knowledge and different skills. So I just wondered whether those job roles are being looked at and whether we're offering enough money, because it's not going to be a false economy if we're just getting loads of agency staff in, paying them high amounts when we could be actually offering a higher wage or salary and getting people applying for these jobs. I suppose that's what the point I'm just thinking about, whether that's been looked at. I'm sure it has, but I just wanted to make that point. And finally, I didn't say it earlier, but I just want to make it absolutely clear, I highly value your staff. They do an amazing job, both the street cleansing staff and the grounds maintenance staff. They're very professional, they're very hardworking, and you know, whenever you see them, they're doing an excellent job. So I'd like that to be passed on, please, to your staff. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will more than happily pass on your thanks and praise to the operations team when I see them next. With regards to the pay levels for the staff, we're not a bad payer, is the long and short of it. But, you know, grounds maintenance infra is not a particularly highly paid role, but we pay pretty well. So I don't think that there is particularly an issue other than running up the council's pay bill, which is already large enough, to go out there and pay an awful lot of staff, because it is a lot of staff, a lot more money, because I don't really think it's going to make a huge difference. It is that sort of lower paid band of staff are ones that are in demand across the country. I think it would be fair to say, whether they be in the care sector, whether they be in the grounds maintenance sector, whether they be in distribution or warehousing, that the pay levels are all very similar. So we are fishing in a quite a competitive pool for that. But for most of those people, like all of us these days, it is about the work-life balance, and it's about recruiting local people into local jobs. And I think, you know, that's always been a challenge, if you like. With regards to, do we spend a lot on agency staff? No, we're not quite in the same little pickle that the NHS is with locums. It's not like that. In fact, the agency staff work for us quite well, because what we tend to do is we tend to try before we buy. So if they come to us as agency staff and they're good, then we look to recruit them into the full-time workforce, and that's given us some good members of staff in the past. And you know, it is a fairly high turnover area, if you like, of staff. That's just the nature of this sort of work. So getting good staff is always interesting. So yeah, the agency, I don't think it's a problem for us. I don't think we're spending an awful lot of money on agency staff, because if we get them in and we like them, then we assimilate them into the Borg fairly quickly, and if we don't like them, then we allow them the opportunity to explore other employment options.
Yeah, just one final question in relation to that. Have you thought about? Sorry, Chair. No, it's just it's answering that question. Can I? Sorry. All right. Thanks. Have you thought about looking maybe at apprenticeships and having them a structured payment where you gradually build them up? I'm sure you have, but
yeah. I can safely say that as an authority, we have a very strong apprenticeship scheme right across the authority. Yes, and we are bringing apprenticeships in. In fact, we've got lots of them already. So yes, we are bringing people in from an apprenticeship point of view.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Rob, I just wanted to come back to a point that you alluded to earlier, that you said we can't cut one side of the street and not the other. And I have residents in Brook Vale, and perhaps some of you might be aware of this issue, where Fabian Close is adopted, Longcroft Close, which is sharing the same bit of land, is not. And we are cutting one side at a cost that is paid by the residents, but yet we're not cutting at Longcroft, which is on the same patch of land, and they're not given the opportunity to pay for that to be done. It really is two standards in a neighbouring close, and I wonder how we can justify two standards of treatment really for the same neighbourhood.
The background. So, yeah, as I understand it, obviously there's a very long-standing arrangement where Fabian Close is being cut by the borough. I believe that is an arrangement that probably predates many of the grounds maintenance staff being in the team at the moment, probably 10 years at least. It's probably been a very long-standing arrangement. That's clearly not, in terms of Longstock, also Longcroft Close, there's just for everyone's benefit, there is a grassed area. It effectively is all split up in terms of the houses that front onto it, so they each own a section of that particular piece of grass, and then they're responsible for maintaining it and cutting it themselves. So it's down to the individual householder. It will be presumably part of their deeds that they are responsible for maintaining it. It's not an area that the council these days would look to take on responsibility for. It's the individual householder's responsibility.
But yet it seems that we've taken responsibility for Fabian Close, that's been adopted, for us to cut the grass, and yet in Longcroft it isn't. And I don't really understand why we have neighbouring houses that are treated in two totally different ways. And sorry, forgive my ignorance, I'm no expert in adoption law of byways.
Yeah, we haven't adopted, as far as I'm aware, Fabian Close. It is just a long-standing arrangement with the residents who I believe pay for that as a separate service to the Borough Council. But it's a very long-standing arrangement which we continue to honour. All I'm saying is from how we would view that now, we wouldn't be cutting grass that is effectively privately owned. We cut Borough Council land, we cut Hampshire County Council land. We're not in a sort of arena where we're cutting commercially for private owner occupiers.
I've got two more people, and I understand, Councillor Miller, I must have missed you earlier. I do apologise, and Councillor Peters afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose in view of the content of the paper, I better declare that I've been a Hampshire County Councillor for several years, and I'm Vice Chair of Economy, Transport and the Environment, so I'm a little bit au fait with some of the discussion that's been going on. First of all, it's probably not my role to say it, but I'm sure Hayley will confirm that getting money out of Hampshire County Council is well nigh past impossible. We've got to save another 80 because we don't get any more RSG from the government. We've got to save £80 million over the next 2 years, and we're doing very well in economy, transport and the environment in being able to retain more or less what we've had for the last 2 years. What we've done, though, and which is not covered in your paper, if I may say, Robert, which I have to say is a fantastic factual report. I think that's excellent, I really do. You've not mentioned technology. You talk about staff shortage and everything else. The problem is a mixture of urban and rural. All your content is primarily urban in this paper. Basingstoke being a key high-density urban town. Hampshire, 85% of Hampshire is rural, is a completely different approach. There's no need to talk about 8 cuts a year in the rural areas, Councillor Wooldridge. So it'd have to be broken down, I think, if you wanted to extend the service in the urban areas. The county, though, on the verges issue, we're investing in robots. The amount of robots that are being used now in private gardens in my village, my next door neighbours, who are far wealthier than I am, have all got little robots running around their back gardens. No difference on the verges by motorways now. because it's not safe to have people seemingly running up and down hills with mowers. I do really think you should look at robots, because we're going to have this staff shortage issue for some time, and I do recommend you do look at that. That's what we've done in the county. You didn't mention, you did mention, not in the paper but in the conversation, rewilding. This has been massive in the rural areas. We didn't do any cutting at all in July, August and September. We didn't do much in April and May, to be quite frank, because of social distancing and the COVID issues. But the climate change people really got to us in a big, big way, and rewilding has become the name of the game. Also, I do think you should probably look at the rights issue, repartine rights on verges. If you're cutting all these verges, quite often it should be down to the residents to cut those. I know they won't like it, having had the service for so long, but they will seemingly accept it. It is their responsibility. The verges that are on county ground or Basingstoke ground that are outside their houses, it should be looked at that is really a resident's responsibility in certain areas. I think that's about it. But as I say, I do suggest, though, as part of the exercise, you do look at improving your use of technology, if I may say that. Okay, it's saved the county on highways issues with all the technology they've bought. It's saved on manpower, and to be quite frank, I think it solved the problem that councillor over there has been raising about shortage of manpower. Thank you. Not so much a question there, I know, rather a statement, an update on what's going on. But I have to respond though on behalf of the county in some ways, even though I'm on this excellent scrutiny committee. You've got no chance of getting money out of the county at the moment. We've got a $1 billion spend on adult and social care.
I think that may be the county problem, and it's something we have to address here when the job isn't being done. But we won't get into an argument on it at this moment in time. Councillor Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So I have two questions. Both are related to global warming and climate change. The first one is, there are clear evidences, and many studies have confirmed that the increased precipitation is going to contribute towards high level of grass growth as well as plant growth. And warm, wet weather and reduced winter periods definitely is going to contribute towards high level of grass growth as well as plant growth. And then we have already reduced the number of cuttings. So then in coming years, definitely this plant growth and grass growth is going to be increased. So how we are going to tackle those situations? And the second question is also related to this. If we do the cutting too often, then there's a question about carbon emission. So that also basically affecting the climate change or global warming and all. So it's a bit contradicting. So one side, we cannot avoid grass cutting. In coming years, we have to increase the number of cuttings. But at the same time, we don't want any further emission related to this grass cutting. So do we consider these aspects for the days ahead, or do we have a plan in place to tackle these situations?
Thank you for the questions, Councillor. So yes, there is no doubt, and I've alluded to it in the report, that as our growing season has extended, what we know about the climate changes is at the moment we're having a lot more precipitation, and we're also getting a lot more variability. And again, Equally, in 2019, we had quite an extended dry period in the summer, and that effectively stopped all grass cutting. We had about a month where we barely cut any grass. So climate change gives you that sort of variability. It gives and it takes away. So that does make it difficult. One of the things you see in the report is that we have invested in new technology. So we have now got the fleet of mowers that are newer, they're quicker, and they're more manoeuvrable, which allows us to cut more within the same time frame. So we are using technology there, perhaps not as Councillor Mellor has alluded, with a little robot sat on it, to go out there and do the grass cutting. But again, making the most of the technology that is there to give, make us be more efficient and effective. With regards to the point I made earlier about the cross-training of staff, again, if we find that we've got periods when the grass is growing quicker, then we've now got more flexibly deployable staff that we can, use in that area. Obviously, we need to have the mowers to do it, if you like, and that is a finite reserve. But I'm fairly comfortable we've got those. But again, those are not that difficult to procure. It's not like going out and spending £110,000 on a street sweeper sort of thing. You can get a lot of mowers for that sort of money. So they are available. So I think the climate change one is an interesting one, as I say, because that's very hard to predict now whether you're going to have a good year or a bad year. And I think our ability now to be more flexible and to have the right kit is going to be our protection against that. How that pans out in the long term, when we're having this conversation in 5 or 10 years' time, we might have to think about that in a different way. The other things that we're doing across the borough to give us some protection against that is an increased look at our biodiversity experience and trying to reduce the amounts of grass that we cut on such high levels of frequency. So where we have brought in these biodiversity zones, obviously that grass is now cut twice a year rather than 8 times a year. And whilst for many people that comes a little bit of a shock, if you like, they're used to the grass being sort of cut at that length rather than being left to grow up and seed. One of the things, the feedback that we've had, and it's come back to a point that Councillor Mellor's made very eloquently, is that there's a lot of pressure now in the community for us to have more, quote, natural habitats. And one of the feedbacks that we've had throughout this period is a lot of people came back to us saying, actually, it's really nice to see the grass growing long. Not perhaps if you're a hay fever sufferer, you're probably not that ecstatic about it. But there is a shift now in what people regard as an aesthetically acceptable situation. A lot of people will view that long grass as not aesthetically acceptable, but more and more people are viewing it aesthetically acceptable. And what we will need to strike is the balance between those areas which we need to keep short grass for amenity purposes, so that you can go and walk in it or play football in it, or what all those things that people use those grass areas for. And as perhaps the county have found, areas where the grass can be safely left to grow longer, perhaps on some of the verges and stuff like that, we can reduce the amount of cuts that are taken, which benefits both the environment and the amount of carbon we do, and also allows us to be more flexible about our resourcing.
Councillor Carruthers.
I'm good. I'm good. Just a comment, really. I'd very much like to see this reviewed again this time next year. I think that this year has been so exceptional that it's very difficult for us to really understand the response to reducing the number of cuts. Obviously, we did have quite an exceptional year in terms of weather, of COVID. And also, we just talked about how some residents seem to actually approve of the long grass in Tadley, where I am, we have quite a big movement of people who were pushing for areas to be left uncut, and decided that that's why these areas had been left. And when they said to me, "Oh, it's great to see the grass being left," I didn't go into detail. I was more than happy to take the praise, even though it wasn't deliberate. But yeah, where I live, and there are some quite rural areas in my ward, people actually seem to like it. And I'm not saying that we need to let that continue, because it was accidental, but I'd be interesting to see as well whether in the spring do we get some residents actually coming to us and saying, "You're cutting it too much," and we just don't know, do we? So I think that it's really important that we keep a close eye on this. I don't think that last year gave us the opportunity to really understand the repercussions of us going down by that number of cuts. So I really think that it needs more time, and that we need to revisit this to really understand whether, longer term, that is something that we feel we need to continue with, or perhaps review again.
Thank you. First of all, I did want to say how much we appreciate your team's work. I know in Winkelbury, it's not just the way that they do a great job, but it's also that they're so cheerful and thoughtful when they do it. So please pass that on. I just wanted to raise about the biodiversity zones that we've been talking about. And we've had the same experience. They've been popular with some people. But I think it would be great if we could be more proactive and actually go out to community groups, one in each ward, and talk to them about where would be the best place to have the biodiversity zone. When should we cut it? Do you want to plant some seeds or something in it? And then when we've got those places agreed, communicate them. And also, certainly I've noticed in some of the villages, we have little signs that say rewilding zone or something like that, so that the community understands that it's been left purposely. And also it probably helps your team as well to remember where they are.
Yeah, I'm hoping they remember where they are. We haven't had too many instances of accidental cuts, but there have been a couple. Yes, strangely you should mention the signage. I was in my fortnightly meeting with Councillor Rafael, and we were talking about just that very issue of signage to let people know what, whether it was deliberate or a more organic growth. So yeah, that's something that we could certainly want to look at. I think I would be a little reluctant to encourage the community to go out there and self-seed all sorts of things, because that can have some rather unwanted consequences. And I'm sure that if Gordon Wade, my grounds maintenance manager, was here, he would be having a slight coughing fit at this point in time. So he's very keen on what his seed mix is. So I will defend his corner in his absence. Yeah, I mean, obviously community consultation is a key thing. We, as I'm sure you're all aware, we've now got a declared ecological emergency in the authority. Certainly I was in the CEP committee, seems like a small lifetime ago, but last week, and we were discussing community engagement and community involvement with all matters related to biodiversity. And I certainly didn't hear anything there that doesn't chime exactly with the points you've raised, Councillor, with the involvement of local volunteers and local communities. So that's definitely a direction of travel for the authority, to ensure that we are working with neighbourhoods and communities to undertake the work that they want us to do. If they, as Councillor Carruthers has said, if we have local communities coming to us saying, actually, you know what, we don't want you to cut this bit of grass, then we're not going to go, no, we must come and cut your grass for you. But equally, they're not maintenance-free areas. If you go down that route, you have a different regime. So they do need to be cut, or they do need to be grazed. There has to be some sort of control Otherwise, you know, within a couple of years, you will get the brambles and the saplings and all those other things that will come through, because it will rewild itself on perhaps a little more oak tree kind of basis rather than nice long poppy kind of basis. So you have to put something in there. But you know, a lot of trends these days is towards natural grazing. You know, you just put some cattle, some sheep, some horses, whatever, to control that. I mean, I come from the middle of Wiltshire. We have a lot of downlands that have historically are grazed by sheep, and that's a mechanism that produces some absolutely stunning landscapes through a very natural means of limiting the grass growth at specific times of the year.
I'd like to ask a question if possible. You touched on about the areas on the estates, about, you know, I've been there since day dot, overgrown, brambles, everything else. Is there a programme, and if there is, can we see that programme at some stage? Come back to this committee, and next year, perhaps, once we get past the summer next year, actually come back and talk to us about actually how you got on, because we say 8 cuts from 11 is a big difference. Is it working? Isn't it working? We don't know. And next year we might have a hot summer. You might only need 5 cuts. You know, we've had that in the past, but then again we've had it the reverse as well, where we had 12 cuts and we needed more. That is the worry I have with the whole thing. It's laid down. You've got 8 cuts. That's the end of it. And basically, I'm talking Basingstoke and Dean at the moment. I'm not talking Hampshire. That if we do extra for Hampshire, that's what we do. But we want to be looking after our own land as properly as we should be, not because someone else is doing something, we will do the same, if that makes actual sense.
Yeah, I think that the issue, as we know, is that we've always kept the grounds to an exceptionally high standard within the authority. And you know, 11 cuts a year is substantially above what most other boroughs would do. So I'm not at all uncomfortable about 8 cuts. And equally, there are some areas of grass that we cut very frequently. You know, it's not for nothing that we've got 2 green flag park areas within the town. Yeah, you know, those areas are cut a lot more than 8 times a year. So, you know, different regimes require different cuts. With regards to the changing planting in the areas, I think that would be something that we would have to get Mr. Wade in to answer, because he's our resident expert on that. But that is something that we've been discussing with him, and I think, yes, it's certainly to appear before the Scrutiny Committee. If you feel that Scrutiny is the place you want to do that, then yeah, I think there's a problem with that.
I think it's something that's come out, and we can't. And I think we would like to look at it, whether it's the same committee or whatever, but at some stage. And if you have a programme beforehand, it would be nice to circulate amongst Scrutiny Committee anyway. So,
just with the programme, there is one. What we don't want to do, if you can put that out, and if that goes public, that's fine. We're not trying to hide anything. But if something happens because they overrun by a day on something else, what you don't want is the resident standing there expecting their grass to be cut that week, because that's what our programme said. So there are programmes, aren't there? But there is a degree of flexibility in it. So I think it's just making sure residents aren't then said, absolutely, on Monday the 29th of November this man's going to come and cut your grass. It's just that little bit of caution.
I think you misunderstood me. I'm not on about grass cutting. I'm on about the hedges and the planted areas that are overgrown. We're getting brambles everywhere, not just on the roadside. I'm talking about the estates. Before I was chairman here, as you know, I was Bucks-King Council, and I think I gave Dave Perkins a headache, because that was one of the things I was on about. It would be nice to have a programme. It's a big, even if it's a rolling programme, to try and clear some of these things. And I personally, as a councillor, would like to see it, and I'm sure the rest of the councillors would, if you can draw up some sort of programme. And if not, we'll perhaps come back at some time to talk to us about it, or Gordon Wade, who's the expert on these planting, because he said to me what we've done in the past is planted the wrong plants. But someone who doesn't do a lot of gardening, I can't comment on that. But I'd like to, if you want to respond, sorry.
No, I think you're right. I think that's the whole point as well when we've been looking at the budget of adding in these extra posts again for this, to try and enhance the environment, because areas like Buckskin do have those issues. So there is a programme, absolutely, but again, there is a degree of flexibility to it, because if one area grows faster and it's a health and safety issue, the team might end up there. But it's just, there is a programme, but there is flexibility to it. But yeah, absolutely, you're right. I think back in the 60s, I think Rob said when he was speaking, there were some wrong plants or plants that, should be kept by you doing your gardening in your house when you just have to walk into the back garden, not a winter maintenance programme that you can't keep on top of. But that's the whole point of this extra budget that we're putting in for those sort of areas.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just a matter of, getting something moving. So people, I think we got to a point, and it's not planting blame, we got to a point where Basingstoke's become old in places, and we need renewal, and I think people need to know when that renewal is going to happen. It's not going to, some of it won't happen overnight. We've got the same problem in Southam, even Brighton Hill, places like that. We just need some clarification where we're going as a council. But anyway, I'd like to thank you, Robert, Hayley and Tom, for your coming today. It was a good meeting with you. Hopefully something will come out that we like, i.e. what I'm talking about in particular.
Fallen asleep in a room or something.
I think we're waiting for, obviously, officers and portfolio holders to come, and then we'll start again. Right, item 6. Let's go back again. The draft budget report. I don't know. Councillor Isaac, are you going to open up with this one? I think it might be better. I don't know what the committee feels, that perhaps we can ask the questions at the end. Would be easier than otherwise. It's a big long paper, and I think, and it's the first time this has been looked at. We're not making decisions just to clarify. We're actually trying to say what we like and what we dislike, I suppose, and what is good and what is bad from different councillors' points of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors. So I'm pleased to present to Scrutiny Committee tonight the draft budget proposals for 2021-22 and the draft medium-term financial strategy for the 4 years to 25-26. To start on a positive note, we are required by legislation as a council to report a balanced budget. So I'm pleased to be able to say to you that that's what's contained in these in this report. I think the proposals demonstrate the continuing robustness of this council's finances at a time of significant uncertainty and additional pressures on our services, both in terms of the demand for those services because of the pandemic and associated increased costs. it also needs to be borne in mind that financial support from central government continues to dwindle. In our case, it's dropped over the last 5 years by £3 million, or some 71%. As a result of COVID, also our income has been adversely affected in a number of important areas, and that's included substantially reduced car parking income, land charges and building control fees. But I think councillors and residents looking at this report can be assured that the borough's finances remain in safe hands, and we will continue to be one of a council with one of the lowest council taxes in the country, yet able to spend a particularly high amount per resident because of our strong financial position. Achieving this projected outcome will be the result of continuing careful, prudent financial management. As always, it's about making the best of constrained resources and focusing on priorities. It must involve ongoing attention to dealing with demand and cost pressures, which require some tough choices to be made, as outlined in the report. The cost of delivering our services continues to go up, so we must find savings, including operational ones, and generate additional income, just to stand still. The proposals before you include increasing council tax by £5 per annum per average Band D property. So that means our services for a Band D resident or family will be £2.62 per week, which in the next financial year, if these proposals are accepted, which I think is remarkably good value for money. We're also proposing that fees and charges will increase on average by 3%. By making hard choices, we're not only able to weather emergencies such as the pandemic, but find extra money to invest in core priority services that residents tell us they want us to provide. So we're finding over £1 million in the next financial year for frontline services by investing strategically in more staff to deliver improved, good quality services. Over the medium-term financial strategy period, this represents a gross increase of over 29 full-time employees and a net increase of 25. And I'd like to highlight some of the areas that we are looking to invest. So 7 grounds maintenance staff so that they can improve the service we provide in urban areas in relation to cutting shrubs and hedges, and also generally in relation to our parks and green spaces. 3 more in the National Environment team. There's going to be a lot more required of councils such as ourselves as a result of the Environment Act having been passed. We've declared not only a climate emergency but a ecological emergency, and the additional staff will help us to ensure that we achieve net diversity gains with new development and make full use of Section 106 money from developers. We have been successful as a council in dealing with homelessness, I'm proud to say, but again that's an ongoing pressure, and there are more responsibilities that are being thrust on us by central government. So we're looking to hire 2 more members of staff in that team. As we all share the objectives of this council in relation to climate change. And so not only have we allocated £2 million for to achieve the objectives that this council's agreed, but we're also looking in this budget to hire 2.5 more staff to help deliver those projects. And we're also looking to appoint 3.5 additional staff to make it easier for our residents to contact us and get dealt with it on reception. So all of this planned investment is to be paid for using identified unused reserves over the MTFS period, and the reserves that we are looking to use are identified in the report in section 8.18 and table 6. This council's finances remain healthy because of careful management going back over many years. We have a strong balance sheet, diversified investments, not least our significant property holdings, which continue to yield consistent, excellent returns. We've got appropriate reserves, which, as I've commented, we're using to good effect, and we have no real borrowings. We are therefore, I think, well placed to meet the future shocks that might be lurking around the corner, be they economic setbacks, inflation, or let's not forget, we're not through it yet, a resurgence of the pandemic. I think it's fair to say that very few councils are in our fortunate position. Many are being forced to cut key services and staff, not investing in them as we propose to do today. It's also I think welcome that these proposals are subject to democratic scrutiny, starting this evening with the Scrutiny Committee, and as portfolio holder I look forward to hearing your questions, comments and ideas. I do. I'm going to get them anyway, aren't I? And also importantly, there's a public consultation exercise that's now underway, and that runs through until the beginning of January. And here I want to, for any of those who are listening in, or when you speak to your residents, please ask them to look at the questionnaire and complete it and let us have their views. Finally, I think it's evident looking at the report of how much work has gone into this, and there are so many moving parts in doing this, and so bringing it into the good order that has been achieved is down to the fact that we have an excellent finance team led ably by the lady to my left, Sue Curtin. So I'd like to thank her. To my right, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
We've got Councillor McCormack as a visiting councillor.
Thank you, Chair.
You have 4 minutes, Councillor McCormack.
I'll be less than that. I just had a quick couple of questions. I'm not altogether sure if it's going to be the director or the portfolio holder who might be able to answer them. Looking at the proposed grant for the Anvil Trust, that appears to be £395,000 going forward. That's the reduced amount, and I just wondered if there was a breakdown in that between the Anvil and the Haymarket, or whether that was just for the Anvil. There's also mention made of certain routes that we subsidise because Hampshire County Council decided to cut subsidy for the bus routes as the strategic authority. Now, they are identified as potential savings in the paper, but I would want to question any kind of cuts to public transport at the moment, given that we have a climate emergency. And if anything, we should be going to central government and asking for increased contributions, preferably to the statutory authority. But if the statutory authority doesn't see fit to contribute, then maybe we have an additional case, because I think we really should be driving to get, no pun intended, people off the roads and using public transport, or getting around using cycle or walking, and reducing subsidies to bus services. If we get bus services that are cut altogether or reduced in frequency, or we have bus services ending at a particularly early hour in the evening, that means that people who work late can't use them. That means if the frequency gets less than an hour, then if somebody misses a bus, they've basically lost half a day. So basically that acts as a strong disincentive and further drives down usage. I think we should be driving those things up. And also coming back to the issue of theatres and some of the arts organisations, we really do need to get some joined up thinking going about how we're going to get people back into Basingstoke. And these are unique selling points. I mean, the Anvil and Haymarket had a really, really good programme this year, in the tail end this year, in spite of what they've been through the last 18 months with all of the pandemic challenges, cutting their programme, having to shut their doors. They are an asset to the borough, an asset to Basingstoke, and we really do need to think about how we're going to get people into Basingstoke and into the town centre, driving up footfall, so we can get what we want to do happening with the town centre, with new shops, independent stores, pubs, restaurants, visitor experiences, all of that. We need to make a start with it somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. On the arts and culture, the current grant to both the Anvil and the Haymarket as a whole is $395,000. Obviously, that's subject to review as part of these budget proposals. So I think there's a cultural strategy paper that's due to come to the Cabinet, CEP in January. Yeah, so that will give an opportunity for CEP to comment on the funding of arts and culture. But I agree with you. They play the Anvil and the Haymarket are very important in the life of arts and culture in Basingstoke, and we need them to play their full part. And hence my personally interested to the extent that I have volunteered to be the council representative on the Anvil Trust Board. So I'm pleased that to be working alongside the new chairman there, Chris Smith. But obviously, in relation to how we can get more people back into the town centre, I agree with you. The Anvil has an excellent programme of shows and events, and I think that they are looking to play their part in the work that we have now underway in relation to the regeneration of the town centre. So I'm sure that they will figure prominently in that. On the bus services, the responsibility for providing these bus services sits with Hampshire County Council. We have contributed as a borough quite significantly over the years. I think that as part of the need to continue to assess whether these services are being fully utilised, whether there's value for money, whether it's appropriate for the borough to be contributing to a service that is one for Hampshire to provide. It's right that is looked at as part of the as part of this budget, and I know that I and officers will be interested to see what sort of response we get from users, and there's further assessment work that I think's in terms of the use of the services that's underway at the moment. Is that right? Yeah, fine.
Come on, do you want to finish now? Right, I'm going to open it up to questions. I think what I'll try and do is if we have one question per councillor and go all the way around, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked on this one, maybe not, and then we'll work it round so it's not just everybody sitting there and one person asking lots of questions all at once. So if we go around the table, people want it, and I've got Councillor Mellor first. No? No? Oh, Councillor Waldridge. No. I said I'll take the questions and then one at the moment, because unless we're getting no questions, then you can have the floor. But no.
So I've got loads.
But what I'm saying is, I'm going round. You'll be coming back if you've got lots of questions.
Okay, so I'll pick my most priority question then.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, there's lots of them, but the one I will start with then is the 10% cuts to grants to community and voluntary sector. I am very, very concerned about this. Sue kindly provided me with a list and breakdown of the current beneficiaries of the 1,354,000 allocation, and I would pretty much say that all of these organisations are worthy of their grant. Well, I would say I don't know all of them, but the 90% that I do know certainly are. I'd like to pick out a couple. Basically, Basingstoke CAB and the YPI. In particular, they provide the backbone of services to our vulnerable people in this borough. The Basingstoke CAB, I guess I ought to declare an interest in that I am the council's representative alongside Jenny Rowe for the CAB, so I've got an understanding of their finances. I'm fully aware that their finances next year may well go down anyway due to the fact that they're not going to get, or possibly not going to get, universal credit funding to help people with universal credit claims, because that's due to expire. So I have real concerns about their budget being reduced, and I would actually be advocating for it to be increased, not reduced. I've previously stood represented the council for the YPI when I was councillor for Brighton Hill North, and I know what a vital role the YPI do in terms of looking after the mental health of our young people. And as we all know, young people's mental health has suffered dramatically during COVID. So any reduction of their funding would be criminal, in my opinion. So those are just two organisations I'd like to sort of draw to the attention of the committee. I suppose my question is, you're saying a 10% cut in these grants. How is that going to be done? Is it going to be across the board, everyone gets a 10% cut? Or are they all going to be sort of put in cases as to why they shouldn't have theirs cut, and then you're going to make a decision? So that's my question. How's it going to be done? And I suppose a supplementary to that is, have you really looked into the vital work that these organisations do, and sort of worked out the impact that this is going to have on the residents that these organisations sort of look out for at the moment?
Thank you, Councillor Waldridge, and this is one of the benefits of bringing these proposals to scrutiny. I listened to what you have to say about particularly CAB and YPI. I think that a lot of the programme grants are due to be reviewed anyway early next year in March. To answer your question, there's not been determined how the 10% reduction would be implemented. There's more work to be done on it in relation to for instance, the cultural strategy, which, as I've said, is coming to CEP. At this stage, I think that we are waiting to sort of hear what people have to say. I think, as a council, we do actually invest considerably in the third sector, 1.134 million. If I compared it with, say, Winchester City, for instance, at the moment, I think they're somewhere around about 650,000, 612,000 in total. And I think that it's right that we should continue to look to our partners to find other sources of funding, and that's why we, as part of these proposals, we do want to work very closely with the Basingstoke Voluntary Association to see what might be done in terms of finding other sources of funding, using the funding from the council more effectively. But as I say, this is a consultation process at the moment, and I sort of hear your concerns.
Just adding to that, Basingstoke BAV is one of the beneficiaries of these grants, so they're one of the people who are going to be fighting for this money. So you're going to ask for them to do a job for you to try and get grants for other people when they're struggling to keep their own grant going. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I suppose I am really, because I'm saying to them that we expect you to perform and in return for the investment you're getting from us. So I'm sure that there are always things that can be done that would represent improvements, and so I think it's right in terms of getting the best value for our residents' money that we do look to BVA to see what they can offer. It's not static. This everyone's under scrutiny. Everyone has in this day and age quite rightly has to do better.
Councillor Mellor, and I've got you down again, Councillor Waldridge.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think it's remarkable in this day and age that you can create a budget where there's extra expenditure. I think it's fantastic performance. But having said that, one area that does concern me is that everybody in local authority, SIPFA, whatever, anybody, seems to be working on a 2% inflation factor. We're nearly, the new financial year is nearly upon us, and I think it's going to be higher than 2%. Are you happy that the contracted rates and everything that you've got through the year will be covered by a 2% increase based on inflation?
Yeah, you raise a good point, and it's one that in my discussions with the Chief Financial Officer is something that we discuss quite a lot. Now, there's differing views on how long any spike in inflation is going to last. The Bank of England suggests it will be transitory. But I'm going to turn to Sue Curtin to see if you, because this is a sort of technical issue really, and it might be useful if you contributed here at this point, Sue.
Yep, happy to. So John's absolutely right. So obviously we're obviously monitoring the market. We monitor the national position. We also have our advisors, our Treasury advisors, who regularly update us as well. So what you'll see in the budget papers is, whilst the underlying position across the MTFS is 2%, we have inflation risk within our risk reserves. We also have different rate assumptions around contract inflation, pay inflation, and just normal supplies and service inflation. So at the moment, we're working on the basis that we will monitor whether whether it is a continued increase in inflation rates, or it is the spike that most of the economic experts are saying that they're suspecting is a spike rather than a prolonged increase. obviously we have the opportunity as part of updating the budget papers in February to, we'll have several more months worth of information, but over the period of the MTFS, the 2%, which is the aspirational figure that nationally we want to get back to, feels like it's the right level of inflation, but we are cognizant of the fact, as Don said, that we have this kind of known spike. That doesn't necessarily impact directly on revenue immediately, because we have a lot of contracts that are already in place with appropriate mechanisms for calculating that. What we have to be very cognizant of is how that impacts on our capital programme. So this is our revenue budget at the moment. We'll obviously be also cognizant of what the likely cost of our ongoing capital expenditure is.
Thank you.
Councillor Carruthers,
I just wanted to talk about page 55. You've got 12.14 play area. I suppose I just was interested to know generally what the response has been from parish and town councils in that £500, because I know certainly where I live, I got quite a bit of backlash from the local town council in Tadley regarding that. You say here that you're going to be reducing it to £250 for small parishes, which is great, but I'd like to know what a small parish is. And just a comment on that really, sort of regards sort of Tadley where I am. I think what could have been a good idea, it would have been actually to cap that, so £500 per play area, but actually if you've got a good few play areas, maybe actually look at charging for a maximum number, which is more of a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carruthers. I think that this proposal originated in 2021 when we proposed £500 for play area inspections for parishes, and based on the feedback we got then, we're seeking here to halve the charge to £250. Clearly, you will have the opportunity to give your views. You have done this evening, and your residents can give their views on this particular issue. Can you sort of help us, Sue, in relation to what constitutes a small parish?
I'm just trying to see. I'll continue to have a look.
Oh right, well, I'm
meetings. I'll have
fine.
a look to see
Yeah.
find out what that is.
No, we might have to come back to you on that, Kerry, if that's all right.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. It's just where I am in my ward, I have a town council. I also have a small parish council. So yeah, it would just be interesting to know for when I'm going into my town and parish council meetings. Thank you.
If we don't find it tonight, we'll send you a note.
It is based on population size, but I will try and, if I can't find it, we'll send it round to the committee members.
Councillor Tilbury.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes. I think in answer to Councillor Mellor's point, I think one of the problems with inflation, allowing for it, is inflationary increases increase inflation, don't they? They get it, but I think the upside of that is, of course, the Bank of England will probably have to put up interest rates where we will benefit from that. So, certainly over the time I've been a councillor, the one tends to balance the other out. We're one of the few beneficiaries. Not so good if you've got a mortgage, but. The point I want to raise is it comes under the bizarre heading of strengthening communities, and that's the cuts to the festivals, the Kite Festival, the Festival of Transport, and the Festival of East Kirchin Festival of Sport. But I mean, it refers certainly on the Transport Festival, and it says the event has grown over the years and has now become self-funding, and so we're not going to support it anymore with an annual financial contribution. I mean, have you actually spoken to the organisers about this? Because I actually received a letter from the chairman of the Rotary Club, who just happened to be one of my residents. And he's basically saying if there isn't any money for it, they might have to pull the event. So that's, I would guess no one's actually bothered to speak to them about it. We have recently discovered the council proposed to cut the funding for next year's Festival of Transport If this cut is enacted, this will be a huge blow to both Basingstoke itself, blah, blah, blah. As we're only 6 months away from the next Festival of Transport, this news is causing many problems in the club, including a discussion as to whether or not to cancel the event. I think that's to be very helpful, is it really? So, I mean, given the small amounts, it does seem a bit penny pinching to be basically trying to take money away from charities. You know, I mean, if I went down the town centre and sort of mugged one of the charity collectors down there, I'd end up being locked up. But we seem to get away with it all the time on this council, don't we? It's...
Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. The thrust of this is that at certain points, some of these events and festivals that we've given support to do become self-sufficient, and that's the assessment that's been made by officers and reported through to Cabinet. You know, I think that is it something like 15,000 attendees and potential and good scope to generate revenues from car parking and so forth. So, but these are draft proposals. You've helpfully made us aware of one of the events that would be affected by this. But I think we will look at that and take these comments on board. But you know, the thing is, and this is a sort of general principle that one has to apply here, and all of us as councillors have to take on board, is that if you're not making savings in one particular area, then you're going to have to find them somewhere else to create a balanced budget. And so it's a judgment, and you know, these proposals are put forward on the basis that the assessment is that they've reached a point now where they are able to continue to flourish. We will continue to give them operational support from officers and help with marketing, but let's see what emerges through the consultation.
Just to confirm, it's a parish with up to 200 properties.
Councillor Mullally.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John, and officers who is incredible effort to bring up with this revenue budget. I have a couple of comments on this revenue, and before I make my comment, I would like to bring to your attention, when you are drawing the capital investments, about the disproportionate poverty in the borough. Unfortunately, one of I belong to one of the councillors of high poverty levels in my ward, which is Brookwell and Kings for Long in Basingstoke. So please do consider in the capital investment, how do we mitigate that, bring them up to what we are calling nowadays leveling up with comparison to the other wards in the borough. When it comes to the revenue one, I just want to bring to your attention to a couple of things here. Number one is the bin replacement on the SC0091, where replacement bins cost is going up 40 to 50, whereas the new one is going from £69 to 70. So is there any rationale why we are charging more for the replacement, whereas very less for the new ones? And the same thing for the concession date. That is one point I would like to bring your attention. And the second one that I would like to bring is the parking charges. So most of these parking charges are happening in and around the town centre. So again, this population is considerably, financially less income group, and we are charging with more year on year. So I know this part is from the Hampshire County Council, and we have been subsidizing this one for quite some time. So would you consider this increases? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for your points, Councillor. In relation to areas of localised poverty in the borough. Yes, it's something that we need to be aware of, and I think that's something that's been applied for a very long period of time with the charges that we make and the council tax and in the concessions that are granted to those who are in those sort of circumstances, and so that's I think a considerable assistance is given in those areas. On the bin replacements, I'm going to sort of have to turn to my right as to why there's only a £1 increase in the new ones. Do you know, Sue?
I'm just having a look at the information.
While you're doing that, I'll move on to parking charges, and I think the point there is that we provide this service as agents for the county, and as it says in the report, what we're doing here is we are over a 3-year period. We are achieving the minimum charge that is required under the agency agreement that we've got with the county. I still think I'm right in saying that we don't make money on it, but so I think it's reasonable that because there's a considerable amount of work that has to go into policing these permit charges and providing the permits and so forth. So I think that as these are sort of one-offs, it's reasonable for us to look for an increase from £40 to £50 for these. Any luck with the bins?
Supplementary, Chair.
Yeah.
Supplementary on this one. Okay. Councillor Isaac, I would like to bring to your attention the parking charges. Previously, it used to be 18. They've gone up to 40 this year, and we are proposing to go up to 50. Successive, every year we are putting under burden. That's where, a lot of residents complain.
And I understand fully, but we are in an agency capacity here, and they have been heavily subsidised over many years, and therefore, as part of the agreement we have with the county on this, we have phased the increase over a 3-year period, and so rather than going straight to the minimum amount required, we've done it over a period of years.
So just picking up further on that point around the parking permits, we have a requirement in our agreement with with Hampshire County Council that we have to actually cover the cost of the scheme. So in order to do that, we have to charge a certain amount, and there is an expectation on them under the agreement that we have to get to the point where we are covering those costs, and that is that £50 mark, if you like. So Councillor Rice is absolutely correct. We could have taken the decision to have increased that in one lump sum. Unfortunately, under the agreement, we now have to take it up to the value that actually covers the cost of running the permit scheme. I am struggling to see the point. I'm struggling to see in the papers the pound increase.
Yeah, that is on SC009.
What page is it on?
SC009.
So that talks. So that talks about the £10 increase.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's saying that the charges increased to £70 for 240 litre and 50 for 140 litre. Currently, they are £69 and £48.50.
So we are, as far as I'm aware, we're aligning the cost of the bins to the Hart figures. So there was obviously, we can come back to you with specific details, but I think it's probably just where we're realigning that there's probably more of a disparity in certain areas, but we'll clarify that, because it's also linked to the charges that we incur underneath the Serco contract. So we'll come back with a specific answer on that one.
Thank you.
Councillor Cropton Burnett.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the work that's obviously gone into this. You've done an incredible job, and it's great to see lots of positives. So things like continuing the funding for the accessibility guide, which is great, so that people can access the council services really well, and getting the 2 new permanent posts for the housing, and also the incubator units on viables. I think they're all really positive things. But I do have a few concerns. And one of them with the festivals. I think they're so important. And so if we are thinking of cutting funding, it's good that we help with the marketing and with the operations. But I think if we can also help to work out how they can keep going and continue growing with whatever funding we can give them, that would be very important. And I also, I'm concerned about the pest control, because I think very often the people that have the pests and need to deal with them are the ones who are least able to pay for that. And then the problem just proliferates. So I think we're probably storing up extra problems for ourselves. And the final one is to wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Wooldridge about the voluntary sector. I think we need them more than ever. We're recovering from COVID, which involves pulling the community together. And the people that do that are in the voluntary sector. We also have a recruitment crisis in the NHS. And the only way that we can carry out the services for caring for our community is by having the voluntary sector supporting the NHS in the work that they do. And I would definitely agree, we should be increasing that number, not decreasing it.
Thank you, Councillor. And yes, it's good to hear your views. You know, you represent your residents, and so you know what's important to them. So I do urge you to get the your residents and other voluntary organisations to write in with their comments. I agree that the voluntary sector plays an incredibly important role in the life of the borough and its people. And that's why I think we'll look forward with interest to what comes forward to CEP in terms of the strategy paper early in the new year, which will help us in relation to the work that we're doing here in the budget. With the festivals, I think you make a good point about continuing to provide them with help. We've got some great expertise here, which has been utilised by them, I think, by these festivals and to good effect over the years. And so we'll make sure that that continues, whatever the outcome in relation to this. On pest control, I hear what you say. I think that it's a one-off. The costs we're proposing for those on concessions of £20 is a fairly small amount. The commercial rate would be much greater than that, but it's something that we will take on board.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of what I was going to say has just been covered already, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that cutting the budget to the voluntary sector, things like the CAB, is just utterly horrifying. Are we in such a good financial position, apparently, because we're slashing the budget to such vital things such as the CAB? It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. We are, in effect, we're letting the house burn down so that we can save the money on putting the fire out. We're going to have an increase in homelessness due to post-COVID. problems with people not having their jobs, just at the point that we're cutting funding to the people that might actually be able to help those people. As I understand it, COB are losing quite a bit of funding in January as it is, and now we're proposing to cut it further. I mean, I just don't understand how we can justify that compared to how much we're going to lose in future if we do cut that budget. As Councillor Compton-Burnett said, we should be increasing it, not cutting it. Thank you.
Well, as I said earlier, how the proposed 10% reduction in contribution to the third sector is eventually determined, it has not yet been decided, and so it's not necessarily the case that the CAB would be subject to any reduction. And on homelessness, I accept what you say, but again, in this budget, we are providing additional resources to help deal with homelessness, and we've got a fantastic track record in this borough. We've got homelessness down to 0, I think. Is that still the case?
As far as I'm aware.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Anyway, it was. I don't know what the latest position is, but it has been during the course of last year. It's not a case of slashing budgets. As I said earlier, we, as a council, invest much more in the third sector than many other councils do, and it's right that we should do. But again, where our budgets are under pressure, and we have to make sure that in determining where that money goes to the third sector, that it's going to the right organisations, and we're getting a value for money, and we are able to, and they can demonstrate to us that they're giving us good service for the grants that we do give.
I've got Councillor Aldridge. I will bring you in next afterwards. And then I've got Councillor Tilbury. That's 3 I've got at the moment. So anybody else want to come in, please? Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank Sue and the team firstly for the work they've done for this. It's a very, very difficult task to get a balanced budget. So, and in times like these, it's even more hard to, before I start sort of going into certain points, I just wanted to make that point first. The one I'd like to pick out on as a comment, and then I'll ask a question, is the dial-a-ride budget and the impact on that. And I'd just like to ask Councillor Islet, what, have you looked at the impact on that and on what that's going to have on the, in this case it's disabled, elderly residents who rely on this service, because what you're looking at here is cutting this service on a Sunday and on several evenings in the week, from what I can see, and that's the very time when a lot of our elderly residents or disabled residents might rely on that to get to church, to get to day centres, things like that, or evening clubs, and for them, a lot of them are socially isolated. That's the only way that they get out in the week. So I just think that cut is particularly cruel. So that's a comment. My next question is about pest control. Thank you for raising it, Councillor Compton-Burnett. I raised and fought for this last year because it was proposed as a budget cut last year. It was listened to last year, and they took it out of the budget, which was great. But it's back again. But I don't understand it this time, frankly, because it seems to be limited to just rats this time round, not the whole of the pest control. So could you explain what's actually being cut? Is it, if you've got a load of cockroaches, you can still benefit from it, but if you've got rats, you can't? Because that's what it reads like to me, and it might be just me being a bit tired tonight, but I don't understand what you're actually trying to cut. here, or charge people for. If there's loads of bees' nests, they might get away with it, but if there's rats, or even if there's mice, they might not have a charge. But that's the question, and I suppose supplementary to that is what have you discussed this with environmental health? Because as has been said the other by Angela, it only takes one resident who can't afford £20 to ignore a rat problem, because they can't do anything other than ignore a rat problem. The rat problem grows, it goes to the next house, and before we know it, we've got inundation of rats, the environmental health involved, and before we know it, the cost of charging one resident £20 is just spread completely into a massive expense for our very, very stretched environmental health team. So I would have liked to have thought that, and I made this point last year, that the impact has been fully sort of investigated before you bring in this, what seems a very cruel charge, really, a swipe at people who can ill afford it. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aldridge. On Dial-A-Ride, that is a service that we jointly commissioned with Hampshire County Council as the Transport Authority, and it's due to be retendered in March next year. So there is some work has been done to look at usage, particularly in those extra out of hours, and that's where these proposals are focused. More work will be done as part of the assessment. We've got this, it's open to public consultation, so we'll hear from residents and councillors and so forth. It's again the difficult choices that sometimes have to be made, and in order to achieve a balanced budget, and there's an equality impact assessment that has been done for all of these proposed savings, and those are attached to the report. So a considerable amount of work has already been done by officers in relation to this, but there's more opportunity for this to be reviewed as part of the consultation. On the other question, I think it's pest control, but I'm going to have to turn to my right, because there is reference to rats rather than pest control. So whether it's directed particularly at rats, I'm not sure.
So my understanding is it is directed particularly for rats. So I think we had previously referred to it as rats and pest control, and we were advised by the service that it's actually linked to rats specifically. I think, as John's already noted, I think we had 260 of these instances last year, and pest control itself is still a £60 charge, and so therefore it is linked to a still subsidised service rather than a charge for the service. And I think the other thing to note is that again, linked to benchmarking of other councils, Hart, for example, charged £28 and Rushmore don't offer any concession at all. So it comes back to that balancing of what proposals you're going to put forward and how you're going to offset those.
Mr. Faulkner.
Well, thank you, Chair. As if my voice will get through this. I swallowed something the wrong way and had a coughing fit. Now the voice has gone, sadly. Yeah, this is a slightly different tack. Having gone through the audit process, it's really good to know that the hard work that's gone into this can be trusted. And I say that because we're seeing more and more examples of other councils where they might put a lot of work into and come into something like this, but none of it can actually be trusted. So I think we're in a very good position on that one. Just 2 points. Because of the last year and COVID, etc., we may have to dip into usable reserves. I would counsel concern in terms of under 17.4, we plan to do a full analysis of our usable reserves, etc. But I'm just concerned that we might not actually be able to do anything about it if we had to dip into it, and we're a bit restricted on our cash situation. So I'd only draw up that point. The other point is slightly, oh dare I say, political, in that we state that we're going to put up our council tax by a maximum for the next 4 years. And I assume that the barons of Hampshire sat next to me will be doing likewise and sending out King John into our area to collect us. My council tax has gone up 21% in the last 4 years. So on that basis, I think it will be 50%. So I'm just concerned that our government, who I obviously love and greatly, are losing the principles of taxation, which is one of them is ability to pay and the other is fairness. I see a lot of claptrap about us oldies should move into rabbit hutches, which is not very practical these days if you've got family who suddenly reappear after having been away for 3 years, etc. So an awful lot of people might struggle with this fairness and ability to pay, and it's something which, of course, we will get blamed for 3 years down the track, even though ostensibly we're only looking for an extra £5 a year, but no one sees it that way. They just see a great big council tax bill. So I would just caution how we handle that and publicise it. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, Councillor Faulkner. Yes, I have, as the person who shares responsibility for the finances, I have complete confidence in the capabilities of our finance team, and I think it reflects very well on this council that we're able to continue to recruit very good people. We've just appointed a new head of finance, and we had I was on the interview panel, and we had some really excellent candidates, and the young man who's going to be joining us, I think, will benefit from working here, but also have a lot to contribute. I'm going to ask Sue to respond to you on usable reserves, but I'll giving her a chance to think on that. Not that she needs much time. I'll just refer to your point about ability to pay, which is again we have unfortunately largely as a result of the withdrawal of central government funding, we have been obliged to look to increase council tax to the maximum over recent years, and that is going to be the case ahead. But you know, our costs keep going up, and so and the demands on our services continue to increase, and so it is necessary to increase council tax. I think we all agree that what Basingstoke charges for the services it provides is remarkably good value, and it's going to be the increase that we're talking about for Band D represents an increase of I think 10p a week for the coming financial year, and there are a lot of there's a lot of support given to those less able to pay their council tax charges, and I looked at this, and if you look at those dwellings that are Band A and Band B, there are some 15,000 dwellings in the borough in that category, and so that's 19% of the total number of dwellings of 79,000, and so, but that 19% of dwellings is paying just over 11% of the council tax receipts that we get, or projected to get in the coming financial year of £9.25 million. So there is a lot of help given to those who need help. Sue.
Reserves. We haven't actually used reserves to close the budget gap. Obviously we have earmarked reserves. Some of those are for capital, some of those for revenue. Of our revenue ones, some of those are risk-based reserves, which is linked to the annual sort of review of risks that we do. And at the current time, I'm content that those haven't been dipped into through as a result of COVID or any in-year pressures. And I'm content that they're still adequate for what we need. Linked alongside that, we have a number of reserves that are for very specific purposes. And obviously we review those on a regular basis as well. And as part of this review of the MTFS, we've identified 4 reserves that are no longer required. They're detailed in the report in 8.18. But we had 4 very small reserves. They're not needed for the purpose they were given, so effectively they're given back to the pot. We don't need those to top up the risk reserves, and therefore at the current time they're identified in actually 23-24, not 22-23, as saying this money can be re-released, so therefore it closes the budget gap for that 1 year only. And in terms of our the current financial year, as part of budget setting last year, we put money aside to the tune of 820,000 in the MTFS risk reserve to meet any ongoing unexpected COVID pressures. So in the current year, we know that we've got further reductions in parking income expected, and therefore there is an assumption that if that is not resolved through other means throughout the year, we will draw from that £820,000 that was put aside for that purpose. But I'll be very clear, the actual budget itself is not being funded, the budget gap's not being closed by use of reserves. And the only other element in the actual papers is the additional funds being utilised for climate change, economic recovery fund and grounds maintenance, where they're being funded out of the money that council has already put aside for those purposes or collected for those purposes. So I think it's probably terminology, but we're not actually using reserves to actually close the budget gap.
Councillor Silbury.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think one point I would make is there's a lot of references near to sort of levelling up charges with Hart, but Hart is a much more affluent place than us, relatively speaking. House prices are far higher, incomes are higher, so yeah, I suppose they can probably afford it right over there. You know, I mean, Basingstoke and Dean generally isn't as affluent a place. I mean, I was in the paper today. There was a housing affordability index, and they were way above us. You know, we're all. I mean, first-time buyers. It's 95% of the country you can't buy a house as a first-time buyer. You know, but their unaffordability was far higher than ours. You know, I mean, it doesn't make much difference if you're a first-time buyer. You've got to move to the Outer Hebrides to buy a house for the look of it. But so I would caution against using that as a reference. You know, I mean, it's just not of comparison. I know they're next door to us, but there's a world of difference between the. You know, Hart is a very rural location. It doesn't have large urban centres in the same way there is in Basingstoke. Certainly, Basingstoke is large, and even the villages are large. You know, Tadley, Overton, Whitchurch, and getting larger all the time. But the one I wanted to raise is the waste service, where it says there's ongoing discussions regarding the waste collection contract with Serco. Once finally resolved, there's expected to be an additional cost pressure. Where in the past, when we certainly with the Veolia contracts, in those there was any inflationary pressures were built into the contract. If fuel prices went up, you know, because that has a major impact. If you're running around in a 5 mile per gallon diesel truck, you know, and you've got lots of them. Those sorts of things were all built into the contract to allow that. So we would have seen an increase, and also there's a general increase if you increase the number of hoses. Obviously, you don't expect to do the same there. So where's this additional cost pressure come from? It certainly isn't the wonderful service they're providing at the moment, and or their ability to use my neighbour's bin as a slave bin the other week, which caused some amusement. So I just wonder why we're thinking of giving them any more money. I think they should be giving us money, and lots of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. I don't know how we compare with Hart, but I think that the point really is that I think the reference to equalising charges relates to the joint waste shared service that we have with Hart. On the point you make about Serco, I don't think that's quite what it may seem as far as the paper's concerned, but as it's a subject of some discussions at the moment, I'm going to defer to Sue Curtin. I know what the answer is, but she's in the middle of the discussion, so I'm going to make sure that I don't say the wrong thing.
Me too. So obviously we continue to monitor and review the contract with Serco, and there are obviously various elements of it, some of which are obviously dear to your hearts in terms of your views on performance, etc. This is actually something far more fundamental to do with how the contract actually operates and how income flows through the council to as part of the contract. So it is a commercially sensitive negotiation at the moment, so can't go into more detail than that. But this is not us picking up additional costs. This is a contractual element that actually has been challenged and we need to review.
Councillor Waldridge, did you have another question? I did cut you off short in the beginning, but
I felt really affronted by that, Tony. So no, seriously, no. No, I didn't actually, but now you've invited me, I'll have to find one, won't I? So yeah, well, it's more of a comment really, and it's very pleasing to hear Councillor Isaac say that a lot of people benefit from the council tax support system at the moment, and it's true they do, and in many cases, I know this through my work, it's through that support that means that they can afford the homes they can, otherwise they just wouldn't be able to afford the homes basically. So especially with the cuts in universal credit and particularly recent ones. What I'd like, I do find it alarming that okay, it's not going to happen from this April, but it's planned for the following year that we are going to be reviewing that support that we offer our residents for council tax support. I think that scheme has been excellent. It's something that this administration got right, and it hasn't had to be tinkered with for many years because we got it right. And I know it's generous in comparison to other local authorities, but it's a lifeline to so many families out there. So I just think I hope when we do the consultation next year, you remember what you've just said today. It is vital, and we can't be looking at cutting that for the many people out there on universal credit and the legacy benefits. They need that for a lifeline, and it will have a knock-on effect on their abilities to afford to live in their homes. I'm just putting that out there now as a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waldridge. Yes, we will look at this closely as part of the further assessment and the consultation. I think I'd make the point though that we, as you say, our policy is more generous than most other councils and goes beyond the sort of the minimum requirements of set nationally. But we haven't reviewed this properly since 2013, and so I think it's incumbent upon us to review our policies and make sure they're still correct.
This is more to Sue. When I asked you a question about this a few months ago, in terms of can we afford out of the existing budget for the many more people who are going to be relying on council tax support because of you know, the COVID and things. And I think you said that that was coming back from central government, that money. Was that just a COVID pot of money? Right. So generally, just so I've got a full understanding of it, our cancer support scheme has to be found from the budget. It doesn't come from central government. Is that right? Right. Thank you.
Questions from anybody? Oh, no. I'd like to make a comment rather than questions. Most of my questions have been put forward. It's nice to hear that you blame the government for some of the costs, because, and you did actually, not getting the grant. It's about time. My concern is overall, yes, you've got to have a balanced budget. I do understand that. But we seem, as Basingstoke, as a long-serving councillor, we're going down, not up. We're losing services. And it's bit by bit, piecemeal. When we talk about the rats, that used to be done in-house and it was free. Long time ago, we can't go back in history, but I'm a little bit fed up with this answer, aren't we doing well? No, we're not doing well, as Basingstoke used to do well. I think it might be worth remembering that.
If I could just respond, well, I'm disappointed that you think that, Councillor James, because actually, as I said in my opening remarks, we are in a fortunate position as a council to invest in new resources and improve the quality and delivery of our services to the tune of over £1 million in the next financial year. And those additional members of staff that we're going to recruit, I'm sure will enhance the already good services that we provide as a council. So much as I admire you, I have to say on this occasion I cannot agree at all with the conclusion that you reach.
I won't get into a political battle. I'm trying to be chair and be down the middle. That was my comment as a councillor. But I'll thank you for coming. I think we've finished with all the questions. And thank you very much. And thank Sue for her efforts in drawing up this budget, even though I may not like it. Item 7, Works Programme Review. We had a paper on this. The director's going to speak on this because we may not be able to, we won't be able to look at this as it is at the moment. I don't know whether Councillor Compton realises that, but if you'd like to explain.
So thank you for your work suggestion. What the process we tend to get through is when we obviously get the information through, we go back to obviously other officers and try and understand how we can actually inform the information that you've requested. In terms of what Scrutiny Committee can do, I'm not sure what we're scrutinising because obviously it's not our project, it's Vivid's project. But what you've actually asked for is a series of information, and I think actually we can supply you with that information and circulate it. I know you've raised concerns about the decision-making process. So as a council, we haven't formally made any decisions yet. So there will be eventually a separate report which will come forward to Cabinet and possibly Council in terms of any land disposal into the scheme. And obviously that will go through an appropriate decision-making process and can be scrutinised at that point. In terms of some of the other issues that have been raised, they will form part of any final design that goes to DC Committee as part of the planning application, and therefore you'll have an opportunity to address some of those issues. My understanding as well is that there is another meeting with ward councillors on the 6th of December, where there's another opportunity to raise some of these directly with Vivid, because obviously it's Vivid's scheme. So in terms of a work programme item, it doesn't feel like, it feels like there's a request for information that we can circulate, but as officers there's nothing we can necessarily do because it's not our project. And obviously it's been subject to a number of areas of different types of consultation, which you quite rightly note has changed the original kind of what that scheme might look like to what it's currently looking like. That's not actually a council officer issue. My recommendation is obviously further reports will come forward from a council's point of view. That would be the appropriate time to scrutinise it. Clearly, the information you've asked for example, you've asked for a copy of the master plan dated 2019. Officers have contacted Vivid to see whether we can get a copy of that for you. But that's what's written on here. We can certainly try and provide you with some information, and I know you've asked for a certain amount of information through the Chief Executive as well. In terms of what you've asked for, officers will try and liaise with Vivid to provide you with that information, but there's not actually a specific work programme item that from a scrutiny point of view, that would come to this committee at the moment.
The information that I wanted was about the decisions that Basingstoke and Dean made, and that includes decisions made in 2019 to reject the master plan that the residents and Basingstoke and Dean and Hampshire County Council and the NHS had all been working on. And the residents were consulted about that, they were involved in it, but then that plan was shelved, and nobody gave them an explanation, nobody consulted them to the best of their knowledge. And they're very upset about that, not least because one of the most important components of that master plan was a community hub. And now they haven't got anything in the new plans. There's not even a hall. And so they're not asking for what Vivid did, they're asking for what Basingstoke and Dean agreed to do, why they agreed to do it, and what evidence there are that these decisions were made in the right places, using the right process.
So my feedback from officers is that we haven't actually made any formal decisions as a council. So it might be useful for us to pick that up offline with you more directly to understand what the more specific detail of the work programme is, and then bring it back to the next scrutiny meeting.
Yeah.
So I point of clarification, really. I mean, I would like to support Councillor Compton-Burnett on this request. I mean, I thought that the role of scrutiny, I might be wrong, but was not just to scrutinise the role of this council, but to scrutinise its key partners, including the housing association. So I, Councillor Compton-Burnett sort of, contacted a lot of committee members prior to this meeting, and I thought it was an appropriate request, and so I'd like to support her in this request. So I don't know what other people feel, but on the guise that it is a key partner, Vivid are a key partner, I think it's entirely appropriate request.
The only answer I can give you, it should go to CEP. CEP should be looking at that rather than scrutiny. We scrutinise what the council and everything else does, and unless I'm looking for advice here on this one.
Like for example, Serco. We've had Serco here. We've scrutinised them before, and I think some of the housing associations as well previously.
So my understanding is we don't have a contractual or formal decision with Vivid at the current time. So in terms of as a council scrutiny, what are we actually scrutinising? This feels like it's a request for information rather than something you can scrutinise or influence.
At some point, so all the residents worked with people to put together this master plan, which I've seen, and it's excellent. And then it was the next time that the residents heard anything, there was no master plan anymore. It was like it had never happened. And instead, progression was being made on completely new plans that the residents were not involved in. What the residents want to know is how was it decided and by whom to drop that master plan that they had worked so hard on with Basingstoke and Dean officers? Because it was exactly what Winklebury needed, and the current plans are not. So something happened, and the residents believe that their voices were not heard in that decision, and so they want to know how it was made And if they were consulted, great, please show us that. But if they weren't, then that's not following due process.
As I said, I will pick that point up with officers in terms of where that position lies, and then obviously we can advise at the next scrutiny meeting if it's an appropriate item for scrutiny or for CEP.
Yeah, let's hang on. I'm not discounting it out. I think we need to investigate it, and if needs be, we can ask a Vivid to come in. Whether they wish to or not is another matter. That is their choice. So if we raise this again, or if we can get some information in the meantime, we can look at it again. I'm more than happy to find out what's going on. It's not right if people feel like that, but if we can't get the paperwork because our officers can't supply it, we'll be talking to ourselves around the table. But I'm quite happy for us to look at it with Vivid and with our officers why it hasn't been picked up, and I'll be talking to Sue afterwards, see what we can do. Sorry, Councillor Lane.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Compton-Brennan. We need to discuss this one, and I herewith confirm that Hampshire County Councillors, in their member briefing, they confirmed in December 2019, BDBC confirmed a new community hall is not required in Winklebury. This is official statement from Hampshire County Council in their members briefing. So it means, it suggests the BDBC has taken a decision, and what we are here is to scrutinize this decision. When the decision is taken, who took the decision, and were they been consulted, or do we have any audit trail of those decisions? So this has been confirmed by Hampshire County Council.
Councillor Carruthers.
I agree with what you've just said, but I think the key is that when Abigail was talking earlier, she said something happened, and I think the problem is we're not clear on what has happened, and until we can understand that, we haven't got anything to scrutinise. We need to understand what the process is. I think it absolutely needs to be discussed, and it needs to go somewhere, and we must not dismiss it, but we have to better understand what that something else was before we can take this any further.
Yeah, as I said, I'll say it again. I'm not dismissing this out of hand. I think we should look again, because what you've just told me, I didn't understand, if I was perfectly honest with you. I think we need to make sure we look at it. And at the end of the day, if we can get Vivid in, they may not come, they don't have to, but if we can get them in, we can ask them the questions as well. So I will put it in back to the director and see where we can go with this, and we will keep you informed on that issue.
So I'm happy to pick this up with officers tomorrow and get some further information on it. We can circulate that back round to Scrutiny Committee, and if it's dealt appropriate by the chair, we can obviously add it to the work programme for a future meeting. But I'll pick up the specific points that you've just raised and get an official response for you. Yeah, I'll speak to officers tomorrow and. The official response. Oh yes, so sorry. I'll speak to officers tomorrow and see what I can find out, and I'll come back to you tomorrow in terms of giving you a timeline. But I'll send that round to the whole committee.
Right. Right, in the works programme at the moment, we've got nothing for the 25th of January, which is our next meeting. So we may be looking at that one, hopefully, to resolve it anyway. But I don't like missing meetings, even if we've got nothing on. I believe we should be having stuff on this committee. So I will be looking to get something on that I feel it would. I was just wondering about the budget, and I'm putting it to the committee. They're going out to consultation to the 2nd, I believe, 2nd of January. So by the 25th, will there be a change by then that we can look at? No? No. So we could have had them back and discussed them. No? No, no. Anyway, we have nothing for the 25th, but we will try and find something, and we will chase that one up, definitely, and I won't let it drop. Okay, and I've got every confidence in our officers to look into it. So that's the end of this evening. I hope it weren't too painful, but thank you very much.